like a notes option. So what you could do is sort of just lift your window up a little bit and maybe have the your Google Doc either off to the side, so you can type in some notes, or if you have to click away for a few seconds, you can to type something in. You'll have to just make adjustments on your screen, but I would like you to use the same notes template, so it's on that same announcement, just like it has been for the last three classes. So it's under announcements or under assignments. Step 2 will have a link to that same Google Doc. Looks like this. So yeah, figure out something that works best for you. You can either have your digital notebook off to the side, or you could even take things on paper and then take a picture and upload the image or something if you wanted to. And I've got videos ready to go. Cora and Kyle was the only video that I think I found on Eutrophication that's there ready to watch, though I think videos work much better through Zoom as well. All right. So Owen and Peter, what was your topic?
Chemical pollution.
Why am I not seeing it here? You guys shared it with me, right?
I thought I put it. I thought I.
Yeah, I can share it with you right now.
Okay, yeah, just go ahead and fire it to me on my email, and then I can pull it up. Yeah, I thought I had them all here, but possibly not. Okay, everyone ready with the notes? We get a thumbs up? Okay. Again, I'll time you guys, shooting for about 10 minutes. Let me share the screen here. Remember to mute yourselves, so we only listen to our presenters. We're ready to go when you guys.
All right, so me and Owen did chemical pollution. And the causes of chemical pollution is because chemicals are, for example, like farmers, when they fertilize their crop, some of that extra fertilizer somehow gets to the ocean from streams or rivers. And then chemicals like DDT and PCBs are the main cause of the problem. DDT is a pesticide used to keep bugs off crops, and is now banned. And then PCBs were used for electrical appliances and refrigerators. Yeah, next slide. How does it affect marine life? So when those chemicals reach the ocean, it lowers the seawater pH levels and strips animals of their carbonate ions. And that means they have to go through unnecessary amounts of energy to repair their shells or find a new one maybe. And then mostly those are sea urchins, shellfish, corals, another certain type of plankton. And it also affects the sea life's reproductive and communication and growth. Next slide. How does it affect humans? When chemicals pollute the ocean, it's caused by us. And sometimes if we eat certain or too many fish that are caught in rivers, some of the fish can already be contaminated with like mercury or another chemical. And then that can cause mercury poisoning, for example. And then if that happens, you might get birth defects, liver damage, cancer, or other serious health problems caused from that. Next. Where did the problem originate? From the 1920s to 1979, 1.5 billion pounds of PCB was produced. And when that was going on, we didn't really know how harmful it was to the ocean. But now we realize that it does not help the ocean and affects all marine life. Next. What parts of the planet are most affected? Places located near the ocean are mostly affected. Places near fossil fuels or big factories. Places with waterways that have power plants or large factories near them. And then areas that have rivers or streams that flow to the ocean. Next. And then there's just an example of what can be caused by all of this and just how it harms organisms and can destroy marine life. Next.
Yeah, so what's being done to mitigate the effects of chemical pollution? So the two chemicals, the DDTs and the PCBs, they're both mostly banned now. The DDTs were the pesticides that were used for farming, and those were banned a while ago because they realized the effects, and PCBs are banned now. And the organization, the NRDC, they're pushing for stricter laws to be made for power plants on waterways, because that's one of the main ways that chemicals are making their way into water now, is from power plants that are like located on rivers and like by the ocean, things like that. And it's like pretty often issues with groundwater are like difficult to detect because a decline in groundwater can't be seen. So it's difficult to like create new like policies and laws about it because they can't see it. But that's what's being done right now. Next slide. So the two organizations that I found that were working on this, there's many more, but the National Resources Defense Council, and they talk with government agencies and push to have new laws made, and they do like research on ocean pollution and chemical pollution. And the Center for Biological Diversity is another one, and they are also pushing to end like harmful oil drilling techniques and things like that. Yeah, the NRDC is, okay, yeah, that's good. Next slide. So the group of animals that we chose to focus on with chemical pollution were the chordates. They're the most affected by it. And it's what defines a chordate is that they have a notochord at some stage of development, among other things. And they're a member of the final chordata. And these consist of like everything from like fish to birds, anything with the spine. And these are all the animals that are being affected by it, all the marine life. So even the birds that live by the ocean and all the fish in it, they're all being affected by the chemical pollution. Next slide. So it's not like one specific species is being messed up. It's messing with like the whole kind of food chain, because one smaller species will be messed up by the chemical pollution that's coming from power plants, as you can see from that picture right there, and it'll make its way all the way up into the larger apex predators, even if it's not directly being given to them. They can still get the chemical pollution through the food chain. Next slide. This is our video.
As far as I've seen, videos seem to play pretty well through Zoom. Can I get a verbal like confirmation? Like, have people watched videos through Zoom before? You feel like they work a little better?
We can try.
Yeah. Well, let's just give it a go. I'll just play it and let's see. Oops. I wonder if there we go.
They're the ocean's largest and most intelligent hunter. An apex predator, killer whales have no natural enemies except one, us. More specifically, our chemical legacy, one so toxic that it's now predicted to wipe out half of the world's populations of orcas within 30 to 50 years.
The higher the exposure, the more severe the effects, and in the killer whales, it's just basically, it's an apocalypse.
PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls to give them their proper name, were used in everything from electronics to plastics until they started being phased out in the 1970s due to their extreme toxicity. But nearly 50 years on, they've not gone away. This is a harbour porpoise which was stranded in Wales. This post-mortem will test for levels of PCB.
144.
They're removing a strip of blubber to analyse.
Because the blubber is all fat, then it gets a lot of the PCB in there, and it's why we use blubber samples.
In nature, PCBs make their way into a mother's milk, and she unwittingly poisons her calves. In porpoises, it's bad. In killer whales, it's a recipe for extinction.
What our work shows is that actually there's a huge problem with PCB, not just in the UK and Europe, but all over the world.
Despite being phased out, PCBs don't easily break down and remain in large quantities in the world's oceans. They found their way into marine plankton, then animals like shrimp, then fish, and on up to killer whales. At the top of the food chain, they receive the highest and most toxic doses. PCBs destroy their immune systems and, more critically, their fertility. Here in the UK, PCB levels in the marine food chain are some of the highest in the world. Our rarely seen Scottish killer whales are undoubtedly being driven to extinction. They now number just 8 individuals. In 2016, an adult female nicknamed Lulu stranded on a beach.
She had such a high burden, it was 20 times the threshold. So her burden of PCBs was 20 times what the maximum should have been. She was infertile, she couldn't have a baby. There hasn't been a baby born in 25 years to the West Coast orca community.
The only good news is that some killer whale populations, like those around Iceland and Antarctica, are avoiding the worst of contamination and thriving. But it could take hundreds of years for orcas to recover from the 20th century's toxic mistakes. Tom Clark, News at 10.
Yeah, so as you could see from the video, even some of the animals with very few predators, few to none, they're still being affected by this. And so what's being done to protect species like this? There's more laws being made, like I said before, about the two organizations, the NRDC. They're both pushing to make new laws that will lessen the amounts of chemicals that make its way into the ocean. And organizations are also trying to regulate, oversee oil drilling companies and things like that to try to lessen the spread, because we can't really take back what happened in the 70s and things like that, but we can lessen the effects now and try to recover from it. Next slide. So why this problem is so serious for us is because contaminating the waterways and harming the fish isn't only bad for the fish, but it also affects us because we derive a lot of our like commercial fishing and stuff, and if we eat the fish from these contaminated waterways, it can be really harmful to us too. And in 40% of the United States, you cannot eat the fish from the rivers there because they're already so contaminated. So 40% of waterways can't be fished from, and it'll just keep getting worse if we don't start to figure out this problem. Next slide. So the conclusion is what's like done is already done. We can't really reverse the effects, but we can still do what we can to keep this problem from getting any worse, and we can try to kind of salvage it by kind of supporting these organizations in stopping these big companies from letting chemicals into the waterways and things like that. Yeah, that's it.
Great. All right. I'll have everybody unmute yourselves, please. Round of applause for Owen and Peter. Questions and comments for Owen and Peter?
I have one. You said like it was really bad from like the 1920s to 1979. So like what happened in 1979 to make it stop?
That's when the laws, like the law to ban the DDT, that's when they started realizing the effects, and that's when they didn't allow the production and use of that pesticide.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
As far as I know, too, one of awareness about certain animals, like bald eagle. The bald eagle population was dropping, which of course is like, the symbol of the United States, and that was getting people's attention. And has anyone ever heard of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson?
What were you gonna ask?
It was a book that this woman published. She was a naturalist. And Silent Spring, she was pointing out that birds were being poisoned by PCBs and DDT. And it was the first it was just became very popular, and it sort of raised people's awareness. And that's when, as Owen was saying, I don't know the exact publication date of that book, but it was around that time that it started raising people's awareness about what was going on. And then all these laws started being put in place. It's a good question. So you're accurate in that DDT was banned in the early 1970s. I think PCBs, same thing. And what's scary about these chemicals is that they're still around. They're man-made and they don't biodegrade naturally. No animal digests them, so they just build up. And you had a good diagram of what's called biomagnification, where it shows that these chemicals get into the fish and then they just move up the food chain. And so you were showing, in the video and in the diagram, how killer whales are definitely at risk. But does anyone know what other organism is at the top of its food chain?
We are?
We are, human beings. And so they're showing and discovering that your bodies are now also full of DDT and PCBs. It's in trace amounts, but it's there because it's been in the environment since, before the 1970s. And they think that a lot of cancers, this increased rate in cancer, is partly attributed to that. You also made a good point, and they showed in the video about how they were taking fat samples. A lot of these chemicals are actually what are called lipophilic. Does anyone know what philic means?
They dissolve in fat, right?
Yeah, it means they attach to fats. And so it's been a phenomenon they've seen in hospitals where patients who've been admitted to a hospital and they're stuck in a bed for a long period of time, your body actually starts to break down your body fat, right? It starts to use its energy reserves. And in hospitals, they were discovering that these people were just getting worse, right? They were starting to get more sick, and they couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. And then they realized that some of these people had a lot of toxins in their fat, and as their body was breaking down the fat, more of these toxins were being released into their blood, into their bodies, and making them sicker. So it's kind of creepy to think that, if I'm not saying you're going to poison yourself if you try to lose weight, but it's scary that these things can get into your fat. And so when you burn your fat, you're potentially, increasing the toxins in your body. It's kind of scary to think about. You guys mentioned groundwater being poisoned. Does anyone know what was all over the news a couple of years ago? A place in Michigan.
Oh, Flint, Michigan, the lead poisoning, right?
Yeah, so in Flint, it was lead that was coming. I think it was from a factory spillover. It was this pork pipe production. Terrible. Hundreds of children had horrible lead poisoning, and it leads to learning impairment, all kinds of problems. So again, a good kind of real world example of pollutants getting released. You guys did a good job mentioning the groundwater stuff. So, okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, good job. All right, that leaves us now with either Kevin and Garrett. I know Kevin's in here, but Garrett, you can just give your half and we'll figure out what's going on with Kevin later. Or Kyle and Cora. Kyle and Cora, are you guys ready to go? Might as well go with you.
Yeah, we'll go.
Next. Okay, all right. So once again, just make sure you've prepared the notes to fill in. I'll pull up your presentation and we'll go for it. that. All right, you're going to talk to us about eutrophication?
Yes.
Great. Okay, everyone feeling ready with notes? All right, again, everyone should mute themselves except for our presenters, and we're ready when you are.
All right. Eutrophication, Kyle and Cora. You can go to the next slide. All right, what is eutrophication? Eutrophication occurs when an aquatic system has an overabundance of enriched nutrients, which causes algal bloom to form. The main reason why it is caused is by human activity like farming, sewer treatment, maintaining golf courses, and other activities that can lead to fertilizer runoff. This causes consequences for drinking water sources, fisheries, and recreational water bodies. Eutrophication occurs naturally over centuries as lakes age and are filled with sediments. And there's a video on sort of the process of how it happens. Mr. Haight, I think it's muted.
Nutrients sorry.
Are food for algae, and the algae grow and reproduce quickly.
Can you restart it here? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Eutrophication is a process that can happen in a water body, like a river or lake, when too many nutrients are added to the system. Eutrophication starts when fertilizers, which are rich in nutrients like nitrate and phosphate, are washed into the river or lake system. This leads to an increase in nutrient concentrations in the water. The nutrients are food for algae, and the algae grow and reproduce quickly, forming a thick green bloom in the water. This algal bloom will absorb sunlight shining on the water, so the sunlight can't reach the bottom. Plants who need this light to photosynthesize will die. The algae will also start to die when they eat up all of the nutrients and run out of food. Next, bacteria start to break down the dead plants and algae, and that releases more nutrients back into the water, continuing the algal bloom cycle. The bacteria, with a continuing supply of food, reproduce into much larger numbers, consuming oxygen as they grow and respire. There's not much oxygen in the water to begin with, so when the bacteria consume it quickly, it might run out completely. Water without oxygen is called anoxic. If the water turns anoxic, all non-bacterial life in the water, including fish and other animals, will die. So, eutrophication happens when nutrients are added to water, which causes an algal bloom, cutting off sunlight and feeding bacteria. The bacteria use up oxygen in the water, which becomes anoxic, causing everything living in the water to die. Eutrophication is one reason why we need to be careful with fertilizers when we're growing crops.
All right, it's sort of like reset it at the end. It's fine.
Great.
Yeah, next slide. All right, the effects of eutrophication. The algae blooms produce toxins that, when eaten, move up the food chain and affect any animal that ingests them, mainly in like a negative way. The blooms block light from getting into the water, causing harm to the plants and animals. Blue-green blooms are a form of algae. They're mainly non-toxic, but in some cases, when exposed too much after, say, swimming or water skiing in those areas, can cause you to become ill. On the right, that picture is what it looks like. All right, next slide. Red tide. Red tide is another form of like algal blooms, or it's caused by algal blooms. Once eutrophication gets to the point of algal blooms and increase in size, they start to discolor waters, hence the name red tide. The blooms release oxygen and toxins in the water, creating a dangerous environment for humans and animals. Humans and animals can swim in these waters, but they can cause some irritation. If you eat seafood containing these toxins, you will need to be medically checked, as the consequences are extreme. And that's what the red tide is, and on the right. And yeah, next slide. All right, what parts of the planet are most affected by eutrophication? Eutrophication is a common phenomenon due to nitrogen and phosphorus in fresh water and coastal waters. Nitrogen is from agricultural and sewer treatment runoff, and phosphorus pollution comes from households and the popular demand of industrial fertilizer. When the runoff enters the body of water, it increases nutrients for phytoplankton, which is a plankton consisting of microscopic plants. The phytoplankton grows on setagrass, and the growth allows the algae to bloom, die, and decay. When the algae decays, sediments occur and block sunlight to the water and habitat. Next slide. How long has this been a problem? Eutrophication has been the focus of scientific studies for more than 40 years, but as it's probably been happening for much longer before scientists just started looking at it and researching it 40 years ago. Yeah. Next slide. All right, what is being done to combat eutrophication? Improvements of purifying performance of wastewater treatment plants include installing treatment systems to reduce nutrient concentrations, implementing filter ecosystems to remove nitrogen and phosphorus present in the runoff water, composting or planting vegetation along stream beds to slow erosion and absorb nutrients. To prevent nutrient runoff, people should sweep up any grass clippings or fertilizer spills on their driveways, sidewalks, and streets. And instead of planting and moving turf grass, plant wildflowers, ornamental grasses, shrubs, or trees. This absorbs and filters runoff that contains nutrients in soil, as well as provide habitat for wildlife. Next slide. Environmental agencies helping combat. The EPA is the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and their mission is to reduce nutrient pollution. To combat this issue, they rely on the Clean Water Act, that is the primary federal law in the United States government water pollution. They've created 7 major components to help solve the situation. The first one is promoting collaborative approaches on water quality trade. Second one is overseeing regulatory programs, approving water quality standards, drinking water regulation, water permits, and helping states attain clear air standards. The third one is conducting outreach, creating communication and outreach material to spread awareness of causes, effects, and solutions. Developing partnerships around the United States and Gulf of Mexico, working with dairy and pork producers, environmental groups, and USDA to create sustainable fertilizer. Providing technical and programmatic support to states, financing nutrient reduction activities, and conducting research and development by the National Research Program. All right.
Okay, so next our species was Arthropoda, or that was our phylum. And there are 4 types of arthropods, which include insects, which are bees, butterflies, ladybugs, ancrinids, including spiders, mites, and scorpions, myriapods, including centipedes and millipedes, and then crustines, including slaters, prawn, and crabs. Next slide. So what makes arthropods unique? They are invertebrate animals with an exoskeleton, a segmented body, and paired joint appendages. Arthropoda help crops through pollination, soil quality, and water habitat. So those are just some, those are some images of where you can find them. Next slide. Common species of Arthropoda. Some species of Arthropoda include butterflies, ants, bees, scorpions, centipedes, lobsters, and crabs. One estimate from the University of Berkeley believes that there are tens of millions of arthropoda in the world. Next slide. Arthropods affected by eutrophication. Many marine arthropods are affected by eutrophication because they clean the water. Due to the increase of phytoplankton population, the amount of oxygen for these algae blooms to grow, this affects the crab population because they cannot get the required amount of oxygen needed to live. This produces dead zones, and those are low oxygen areas in oceans and lakes. Next slide. How are crabs affected by eutrophication? So we looked at blue crabs, and blue crabs are affected because they need 3 milligrams of dissolved oxygen in the base water. And because of eutrophication, the crabs are unable to get the oxygen amount they require. And on the left, that is what a healthy blue crab looks like. And on the right, that is what an affected crab looks like. Next slide. So what is being done to help blue crabs? The Chesapeake Bay program has a mission to restore the habitat for the blue crabs. This is an example of water quality improvements, underwater grass restoration, and proper harvest management. This will protect the blue crab populations and maintain the resources into the future. Blue crabs are important because they help the bay's economy, maintain healthy waters, they're important prey, and the crabs eat dead fish and are clean up on the bottom of the bay. Next slide. What organizations are trying to help the crabs? So the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and Program, their mission is to help the blue crabs because they're very special in that area. And one measure of the bay's health is the quality and distribution of the crabs. The crabs are one of the more vulnerable species that is drastically affected by eutrophication. And their website suggests to help eutrophication in the area is limiting your drive time and walk or bike instead. Do not fertilize your lawn. Grow oysters and turn off water when you brush or wash your hair. Brush your teeth or wash your hair. Next slide. Kyle, do you want to talk about this one?
Did we lose Kyle?
Sorry, I'm here.
Oh.
All right. Why does the ocean deserve funding? Eutrophication does not just affect marine life and ocean life. It affects humanity as well. Having healthy oceans both help with ourselves and our eating because the ocean provides like a ton of food that we eat. Also, healthy oceans help with absorbing carbon dioxide, which helps with climate change. Poor water due to eutrophication depletes fish species, coral reefs, degrades the ecosystem and water quality. If we can develop and maintain responsible waste and agricultural practices, the oceans will provide us with food and help absorb carbon dioxide that will keep our prospering and will help us.
And why should efforts to preserve arthropoda, why should they be funded? The phylum of Arthropoda needs funding because they're major food sources for many living things. They clean up debris on land and ocean. They pollinate flowering plants, and over 100 crops are pollinated by Arthropoda. They help with soil aeration, which prevents the deficiency of oxygen or toxicity of carbon dioxide in the soil, and water infiltration, which helps water from the ground enter the soil. So because there's millions all over the world, they really help the whole world. Next slide. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry, why can't I exit out of this? I'll have everybody unmute yourselves, please. Round of applause for them. Way to go. Questions or comments for Kyle and Cora? Again, remember to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. All right. So a couple comments just from me. Good points on the eutrophication stuff, how it's been studied for 40 years. One of the big, I like that you made the point that eutrophication occurs naturally, which is great. Like, it is a natural thing for algae populations to explode and then oxygen get used up. But the amount of occurrence definitely has gotten worse in like the last 40 years, especially with the dawn of, anyone ever heard of the Green Revolution? Ever studied that at all? So it was a big moment in agriculture where we basically started to engineer plants that can grow in much poorer conditions, like poor soil conditions and stuff. But these plants, especially crops like corn and rice and soybean, they need fertilizer, and then they grow really well. But the problem is then, so farms everywhere started using tons more fertilizer, and that's what started to wash into rivers and into the ocean. And so this eutrophication problem got a lot worse, became a much more common within that time. And so it's being well studied now. And Kyle, you mentioned one of the solutions, or I think it might have been in the video too, is about a more sustainable fertilizer. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, if it's something that doesn't dissolve easily in water, or it doesn't wash away as well, or it's more of like a natural fertilizer that doesn't then technically feed the algae. I'm curious about what they're looking into.
Like, a natural fertilizer can be manure, and that was basically the first fertilizer ever.
Yeah.
But since then, not everyone likes that. But so they're
Yep.
trying to find a good middle ground.
Nice. Cora, you gave a great description of arthropods. I think at one point, though, you said that they are an introverted species.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I just can't pronounce stuff well.
Yeah. Oh, no, it was good. I just, I think you meant invertebrate species.
Yeah.
And invertebrate means there's no backbone. In fact, it is this, you made a really good point about how diverse they are, because it is, when you look at the species count of chordates, only 5% of the species actually have, I'm trying to think of, I think it's chordata, but only 5% actually have a true backbone. And the reason for that is because of arthropods. There are so many insects. It's such a diverse subphylum that it really makes a big difference there. Yeah, like you said, 10 million. Good focus on Chesapeake Bay stuff. I went to school on the East Coast. So there was a lot of information about that effort. I can't even read my handwriting about some of this, but you made Cora, I like your point too about the importance of arthropods as maintaining soil. This is another thing that I think a lot of people, when they think about agriculture and the world's problems with food, they don't think about soil quality and how modern agricultural practices really aren't good for soil. And so the more we can protect and preserve things like insects and other arthropods and also just worms and stuff that really help soil kind of regenerate and get the nutrients in it, that's important. So that's kind of also a good long-term goal.
And something we didn't mention, but there are a lot of third world countries. There's some organizations that want to package insects because they're so nutrient dense, and that's something humans can live off of, but we just don't really like to.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we'll see. We might start eating insects and stuff soon, though. Just taking care of the arthropod group. But all right, any other questions or comments? All right, then Garrett's the last group we have to hear from. But so Garrett, sounds like you're having connection issues, though.
During the presentation, I got kicked out about 5 times.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So I'll present, but I might get lagged out or I might freeze or something like that.
Okay. I mean, we can try, or again, if you want, because I know Kevin too is probably gonna have to submit a video. I mean, if you want, you can just do a video and we can watch that later or something. But we're hearing you loud and clear now. If you wanna, I mean, do you just want to try it?
Yeah, I'll just try it.
Okay, let's try it. And so I'll pull up your presentation and we'll just take it from there. But yeah, if we cut out once, then we'll just we'll stop. So, alrighty, last one here. Garrett, what was your topic?
Ocean acidification.
Okay. All right, I need this to get out of the way here. And are you going to start from the beginning or halfway through?
Beginning.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, does it seem to be working so far?
Yep.
Great. All
Ocean.
right.
All right.
Is everyone feeling ready with notes? Does anyone need a minute? Nope. Okay. All right. Let's go for it.
Okay. So as we know, acidification is how it's affected from climate change, with CO2 increasing the pH of the ocean, so making it more acidic. And it's harmful to shells, and it's a result of climate change. Next slide. So here's the pH scale that we all learned about. And the lower the number, the more acidic a thing is, the higher, the less. And in the last, well, what happened was the ocean's pH was 8.2, and it dropped to 8.1. But the scale was like from 8.2 to 8.1. It's gone up 30%. Next slide. So the CO2 in the oceans make carbonate, and the calcium carbonate is what shellfish use to make their shells, and the carbonate is what takes it away, and it hurts the shells and weakens the shells. Next slide. And the main problem is that there's really two problems, and the first one is with the ocean. So the less selfish and the weaker they are would mean whatever eats it would have less prey and less efficient prey to eat, therefore lowering its own population. And the stuff below it would expand, and what they eat would go down. So generally, all the fish in the ocean would have a smaller population if all shellfish had a lower population. And the next slide is the shellfish farms. And the problem with humans, as well as the food chain problem, is that in Washington, shellfish farmers, they're realizing that their shells are being a lot worse than what they have been. They're being a lot more inefficient and just not being as good, as growing slower. Next slide. I think that's, yeah. And the mollusca are the second largest phylum of the invertebrate animals. Invertebrates are animals without a backbone, so like squids, octopuses, clams, scallop, mussels, and snails. And that was my half.
Great. Okay. Yeah, and so we'll see. Hopefully Kevin will submit a video that at least I can watch the rest of it. So, okay. And no video or anything, right?
No.
You look up now? Okay. All right, any questions or comments? For Garrett? Glad your connection held out.
Yeah.
Garrett, I liked your point about how the pH, even though 8.2 to 8.1 is a big deal. Does anyone remember what scale pH is based on? Remember what it was called? It's a math thing. We didn't teach it that long ago.
Try the name of it.
It's something you can do on your calculator as well. There's a little button for it. It's a logarithmic scale, which means you're doing times 10 to the power of whatever number. And so, yeah, like 8.1 to 8.2 is, you said like a 3% difference. It ends up being pretty significant. So, and you talked about aquaculture and raising like mussels and clams and how they don't grow as fast. And I don't exactly know how aquaculture stuff works, but I would assume that one of the issues with that is that when they're when they're farming that, the way they make their money, I'm sure, is by selling it by weight, right? It's not like they're counting how many clams or mussels that they've sold. It's the weight of the actual meat. And so yeah, if they're not growing quickly, then they're losing money, right? Because you're selling a whole bunch of tiny little organisms rather than like big ones that you want, and you're not going to make as much from that. Another thing too is reading a little bit about this, it seems like it's the young ones in particular that really struggle. Like they can't get the early larval stages of clams and mussels to grow. And so one way they've addressed that, as far as I know now in aquaculture, is they start growing the clams and mussels in like separate vats, like outside of the ocean. Like they put them in artificial salt water where they can at least grow a little bit, and then they put them out into the bay or the ocean, but they're still being affected by that lowered pH. So that was a good point there about aquaculture stuff. All righty. Anything else for the good of the group? Well, good job. You made it through your presentations. However, before we vote, I know it's been almost 3 or 4 lessons since we heard from some of the first groups that presented. And I really want you to be able to consider everything about that problem. So you are all going to present again. Love seeing everybody's faces with this. But what you're actually going to do is create a little pitch video, and we're going to use Flipgrid. How many of you have used Flipgrid before in other classes? Most of you, awesome. So if you go back to that same little task post that I have on Canvas, I think this is the third one listed there. Number 3, I've got links to Flipgrid, both to like the class grid that I made and also to the specific assignment. And what I want you to do is just create a 1-minute video where you just very quickly summarize your issue, explain what the funding would be used for, and why you should receive the $100,000. And again, I give you 1 minute. Try not to just speak really fast. You want to think about what are the very targeted, right? This is, again, it's like a pitch. You have a very short attention span that people are going to give you. So you want to just have a clear, concise message that other people can watch. I also encourage you, if you've used Flipgrid, you can use the little props, you can use animations. If you've got something in your house that you want to grab, I encourage you to do that. I've got a little example video. So here is the Flipgrid site. Here's our Science 2 class grid. And then here's the assignment. I made a little video of myself with my daughter too. So feel free to check that out as an example. Now, since we're in Zoom, I'm actually going to have you guys I'm going to split you into your groups in breakout rooms, because that seems to be a cool feature that they can use here, and I want to play with that a little bit. And I'll give us probably about 10 minutes. In fact, that's less than that, because we've only got about less than 10 minutes left in the period. So we'll just split right up until the end of class, so until 3:05. So right at 3:05, I'll have everybody come back in just for a quick check-in, and we'll go from there. What I want you to do in the breakout room is just have a quick chat with your partner to make sure that you're not repeating yourselves too much. I mean, it's okay to repeat yourself in your video. You're going to have to you're each making a 1-minute video. And since you worked on the same thing, there will be a little repetition, but you might want to decide, okay, I'll do the organism, you do the issue, or I'll do this part of the issue, you do that part of the issue, work that out. So again, I'll split you into your groups. For those of you who don't have a partner here, I'll still throw you in a group, but then you'll just have to, you can come back in the main room if you want. But let's plan on meeting back in the main room at 3:05. Yeah, Cora? Might need to unmute yourself.
Where's the Flipgrid? Is it in the email?
It should be in the Canvas post. Yeah, both the announcement and the assignment. That it's the tasks for today. Should be the third category. Yep. All right, let me split you into your breakout rooms. Okay, I just assigned the rooms, so you should be able to go into them.